Welcome to this episode of Religion and American Life, a podcast by the Boisi Center for Religion and American Public Life at Boston College. This podcast is an initiative of the Boisi Center's commitment to connecting a community of scholars, policymakers, media, and religious leaders in conversation and scholarly reflection around issues at the intersection of religion and American public life. My name is Madeline Jarrett. I am the Graduate Research Assistant at the Boisi Center, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to a special podcast episode. Today, we'll speak with our fearless leader, the director of the Boisi Center, Father Mark Massa, about his newest book, Catholic Fundamentalism in America, which has just been published by Oxford University Press. Today, we are also joined by the undergraduate research fellows at the Boisi Center, Liam and Joey. Mark Massa is the director of the Boisi Center for Religion and American Public Life at Boston College, where he is also professor of theology. His monograph, published in 1999, Catholics and American Culture, Fulton's Sheen, Dorothy Day, and the Notre Dame football team, received the Alpha Sigma Nu Award for the best work in theology for 1999 to 2000. His ongoing area of research is American Catholic faith and culture of the past century. As the first holder of the Karl Rahner Chair in Theology at Fordham University, Massa also directed the current Center for American Catholic Studies there. From 2010 to 2016, he served as the Dean of the School of Theology and Ministry at Boston College. He also served as board chair for the Boston Theological Institute, a consortium of 9 divinity schools, seminaries, and rabbinical colleges in Greater Boston. Father Massa has appeared on a number of programs in the American Experience series on PBS, including Religion in America and An American Conscience, the Reinhold Niebuhr story. We are delighted to have the chance to interview Father Massa today. Welcome.
Thank you, Maddie. Thank you for that nice introduction.
So now I will kick it off to our undergraduate research fellows, Liam and Joey, to offer some questions.
Thank you, Maddie. So, Father Massa, can you start by giving us a brief overview of Catholic fundamentalism in America and what inspired you to write it?
Right, that's Joey Monti, one of our fearless seniors, just graduating in a couple weeks. Anybody who studies American religion knows that fundamentalism is a big topic. But until my book came out, there's really not been a book on Catholic fundamentalism. Fundamentalism in America has always been considered a uniquely Protestant thing. So if you go to the 5th floor of the O'Neill Library, there's a big chunk of BX books. There are several shelves of books just studying Protestant fundamentalism, which is not, fundamentalism is not synonymous with conservative or traditional. The vast majority of conservative Christians are not fundamentalists. And so the vast majority of conservative Protestants are not fundamentalists. Fundamentalism has a specific technical meaning. It's the far right wing of believers who want to break away from mainstream churches and form a pure, smaller, self-selective group. And the overriding thing that defines them, that makes them fundamentalists and not just conservatives, is their sectarianism. This is very important because Marcialiotto was a very famous scholar of religion at the University of Chicago, and he wrote the entry on Catholicism for the University of Chicago Dictionary of Religion. And he starts off by saying the opposite of Catholic is not Protestant, but rather sectarian, and he was right. Sectarian is the opposite of Catholic because the Catholic tradition is the big church, it's the big tent, it's the big church. As people have noted, Catholicism means here comes everybody. So sectarianism is that small group of believers who want to break away from the larger church, admit only believers who believe what they do, people who live outwardly perfect lives, who have a very strict line of separation between the inside and the outside. Probably the most famous scholar who studied Protestant fundamentalists was a scholar at University of Notre Dame named George Marsden. His book, Fundamentalism in American Culture, is a landmark study, came out in 1980. That book is considered sort of the gold standard. And in that book, he said, 1919 was the year when Protestant fundamentalism got born in the United States, okay? There were certainly conservative Protestants before then. But 1919 was the year, which was the end of World War I, when a group of people started breaking away from larger Protestant churches to form themselves into very small, ideologically sectarian groups. I've been worrying for a couple of years about the right wing of American Catholicism. 2 years ago, Pope Francis noted that the American Catholic Church is unique in world Christianity as being the center of his most vocal critics. And he also said that the American Catholic Church contained within it certain elements describing themselves as Catholic, but who in fact were not Catholic. As soon as he said that, I thought, I think I need to look at that. I need to find out what's going on there. So I started reading around, surfing the web, but you have to, as you know, this is not for the faint of heart when you start going through the blogospheres. And I discovered a stream. It's a stream that began with a Jesuit in the late 1940s named Leonard Feeney. He was at the Harvard Student Center. He sort of gave birth to this stream, but he set up a sort of type of Catholic belief that's marked by sectarianism, that is the desire to break off and form a small, pure group. It's marked by apocalyptic rhetoric, that is, if you don't do this, you're going to go to hell and the world will come to an end. It's marked by a very uneasy alliance between religious and political conservatives. That was buried at the time when Feeney emerged, but in the course of the 21st century, that alliance between religious and theological and political conservatives in the American Catholic Church has become more pronounced and more troubling, I think. So that's what led me to think about this project. It took me a couple of years to sort of hone this. So my book is an 8-chapter book, starting with Leonard Feeney, ending with Crisis Magazine, which is a contemporary online journal, a Catholic journal, looking at these various groups and people who in fact embody what I take to be Catholic fundamentalist impulses that are opposed, I think, to the Catholic impulse. Indeed, as I say in my introduction to the book, Catholic fundamentalists are actually un-Catholic and maybe even anti-Catholic. That's the surprising. They think of themselves as super Catholics, but they're not Catholic at all, I think.
So I'm kind of following up on that.
This is our other great senior undergraduate research fellow, William.
Thank you. You say it starts kind of with Feeney and it goes over time. Is there a thread that kind of connects the Catholic fundamentalism that's beyond sectarianism, or is it kind of just that relation to sectarianism that brings all these different kind of movements under this one?
Yeah, the thread that links them, that they are all in some sense or other sectarian. That is, they all want to break away. They're very critical of the larger church, including Pope Francis, including usually their bishops, their own Catholic bishops. So they're marked by a sectarian impulse to pull away from the larger group and form themselves into very small, perfect societies. They're also marked by this apocalyptic language that everything's dependent on your buying into my understanding of what Catholicism and Christianity is really about. And if you don't agree with it, then you clearly are not in the true church and you're clearly not among the saved. It's not afraid of going after money and political power in terms of achieving its ends. All the groups and people I look at in my book have those qualities, but they embody them and show them in different ways, I think. So it's not one size fits all, it's one size fits one, but there's certain commonalities that once you look back and see it through, consider my book sort of your glasses, okay? Once you read it through my lens, you think, oh, wow, so there are these threads that I can see now, that these are just not random people or movements that emerged here and there. There's a tendency in American Catholicism, as in American Protestantism, because one of the 5 factors that links all these groups is they have a profound distrust of modern culture. That includes modernity on every level. There's a profound distrust of the modern Catholic Church after Vatican II, which they believe betrayed the ancient faith. There's a profound distrust of American culture, which they view as too liberal and to open to other viewpoints. There's a profound distrust, especially of pluralism. That is, that there are many ways of being Catholic, just as there are many ways of being American. That's why one of the groups that I do look at in this book is a group of Catholics who are called the Integralists. Integralists are Catholic thinkers, quite famous ones like Adrian Buell at Harvard Law School and Patrick Deneen at the University of Notre Dame Law School. Integralists believe that church and state should not be separate. So the word integralist actually comes from the idea that religion and the state should be integrated. They should be one thing. And the argument they have is that the First Amendment was a mistake, that there should not be separation of church and state, and there should not be freedom of conscience. There should be one church, the Catholic Church, and people should not be free to follow their consciences, because people who believe that any other church than the Catholic Church is the true church are led by a false conscience, and we have no obligation to respect their consciences. Integralism is evidence of Catholic fundamentalism at the top end. Most Catholic fundamentalists don't attend Harvard Law School or University of Notre Dame Law School. So integralism represents sort of the top intellectual end of Catholic fundamentalism, and it goes down to and includes Mother Angelica's EWTN, which is the most watched and popular Catholic television network on earth. Millions of people watch that network every day. So Catholic fundamentalism goes from the very, very rarefied few intellectuals to a very broad spectrum of people who watch EWTN. My guess, now this is Massa is not a sociologist, so I've not done any kind of like probing in terms of numbers, but the vast majority of people who watch EWTN are not themselves fundamentalists, but they are getting a fundamentalist message that simplifies what Catholic Christianity teaches and emphasizes certain sectarian parts of it that once you start considering what's going on is very troubling, or makes me very troubled anyway.
So you mentioned different figures
few,
associated with
this
intellectuals, but in your view, where do you most visibly see Catholic fundamentalism today? Media, politics, parishes, academia, somewhere else?
Fundamentalists are better at social media than other kinds of Catholics. Mother Angelica has the most sophisticated media, or Mother Angelica, of course, is deceased now, but EWTN is the most sophisticated and best at producing television shows. So I would say the Catholic fundamentalists are very, very evident in social media. The blogosphere is chock full of them. But I think social media has been a blessing and a curse. It's been a blessing because it makes all kinds of information available to all kinds of people who otherwise would not have the ability to access. The bad side, the downside of social media is that it enables anyone with an account and a laptop, any of those people can sort of pontificate about things they know very little about. And therefore, when you're looking up something, when you type in, whatever the subject line is in Google or Wikipedia, all kinds of stuff comes up written by people who, in fact, don't know what they're talking about. And if you do know what you're talking about, it's quite disturbing. And when you start reading what some of these people write about the Catholic Church, it's actually troubling. And it's more than troubling. It's very concerning, because lots of people are getting their information from these places that, in fact, are giving false information. The classic example I give is that Mother Angelica always railed against bishops, especially the Bishop of Los Angeles, who's a hero of mine, for denying the doctrine of transubstantiation. Well, the Catholic Church has no doctrine of transubstantiation. The Catholic Church has the doctrine of the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist, which the Council of Trent says is appropriately called transubstantiation. So transubstantiation is not a doctrine, it's a theological explanation for the doctrine. But I mean, here you have somebody, in this case, Mother Angelica, holding forth about things she didn't know and sort of going after a cardinal archbishop because he refused to use that word in talking about how Jesus is really present. He did believe that Jesus is really present in the Eucharist. But so you have people getting this information, thinking it's the gospel truth, and having nothing against which they can compare it to sort of see how reliable that information is. So social media makes that available. It has democratized, as I tell my students, it has democratized ignorance, you know. So anyone is capable of giving the false information and passing it on, and then it takes on a life of its own, you know. And it's very hard to contain at that point. And I think that's why, I mean, as everybody here knows, every year we have this big meeting with cardinals, archbishops, and bishops called the Way Forward. We just had the fourth such meeting in New York. And I talked to them a lot about this, about social media, and they're very concerned because their concern is how do we get the truth out in a world where there are hundreds and hundreds of sites on social media giving false information to people, you know? And if you try to correct it, it looks like you're being defensive, but in fact, you're just trying to get out true information. So it is a big problem.
Yeah, so going off, I guess, social media, do you think that Catholic fundamentalism has had a larger impact on younger Catholics because they're more so on social media, or what demographics do you think have kind of
I think that the influence has less to do with age than with education. I think people who haven't had the ability to study theology or study theology in a very sophisticated way, they take this stuff to be the literal truth. This is what Catholicism teaches. And the problem is they've never had the ability to encounter teachers or texts that give them some sort of critical handle for interpreting this, or giving them interpretive boxes to put this information in. Because as both of you know, since both of you have studied theology, theology is a very sophisticated discipline. It's a complicated discipline, and nuance and difference are important to the theological task. So being able to make distinctions between this and that, and sort of splicing down theological categories, that's part and parcel of the theology's task. I think the majority of people who get this stuff and buy into it are themselves sort of theologically illiterate. And this is especially helpful, I would say, to Catholic converts. They bring with them a lot of their evangelical Protestant or whatever presuppositions with them. And if they haven't had the ability to actually study the Catholic theology in a sophisticated way, those earlier beliefs simply get grafted onto the Catholic tree trunk, and a very strange growth ensues. I remember somebody asked me one time, I was giving a talk about my book, how many Catholic fundamentalists do you think there are? I don't know. I don't know. It's not that big. It's not that big a number, probably thousands, but not millions. The number of Catholics in the United States is a divisive issue. The people argue over the numbers. It's estimated that Catholics make up 22 to 24% of all Americans. I think maybe 1 or 2% of that group I would fall into the category of fundamentalists. And as I said earlier, the vast majority of conservative Catholics aren't fundamentalists. They just prefer more traditional worship. They like Mass in Latin, which is fine. I had 12 years of Latin. I love Latin, so that's fine. They like saying the rosary. That's fine. You know, I have my rosary in my room. So it's not those kind of things that make one a fundamentalist. It's actually a set of beliefs that make one a fundamentalist, and it's a set of beliefs for distinctly ideological reasons that are tied closely to a vehement rejection of modern culture and of modern religion. Fundamentalism is also ahistorical. That is, they believe that the church exists outside of time and that the church can't change because the church at some moment in its past achieved its perfect moment. And among historians, this is called primitivism. Primitivism is a historical belief that at some moment in the primitive past, a culture or a language or a religion or a state, whatever, achieved its perfect form and can't evolve from that, because to evolve from that is not to grow into something better, it's to sort of devolve into something worse. So fundamentalists tend to be primitivists. So Protestant fundamentalists tend to believe that the primitive church described in the 5th book of the New Testament, the Acts of the Apostles, that's the perfect church. So if you're claimed to be part of the real church, you should worship and believe exactly what the Acts of the Apostles said the early apostles did. Catholic fundamentalists don't look at the Acts of the Apostles. Catholic fundamentalists tend to look at them in ways just like, for Leonard Feeney, he believed that perfect primitive moment happened in 1302, when Pope Boniface VIII put out a letter called Unam Sanctam. And Boniface VIII said, famous line from Unam Sanctam, which is the papal encyclical, that it is absolutely necessary for salvation for every human person to be subject to the Roman pontiff. In other words, if you weren't a baptized Catholic under the Pope, you were going to hell. Okay, a statement that may or may not have made sense in 1302 when there were no Protestants and there were very little else, and the vast majority, 90% of Western Europe was Catholic. Well, we're not in 1302. We're in a different cultural circumstance now. But Leonard Feeney said, no, the church elucidated its perfect faith in 1302, and there's no reason why should we change. There's no development is possible, and therefore we should take Pope Boniface VIII's statement at its face value, as he did in 1302. So that ahistorical primitivist belief that somewhere in the past, in the primitive past, the perfect truth was elucidated, and all we have to do is parrot it. We simply have to repeat it, and that's the correct answer to our faith. So fundamentalists, I think all share in that primitivist devotion to a past statement or form of belief.
Thank you. So, speaking of a history and education, what role do you think Catholic universities and theologians play in responding to or inadvertently reinforcing fundamentalist thinking?
Well, yeah, the reason I read this book is I think it's part of Boston College is a very fine Jesuit and Catholic university. Theologians at Boston College have an obligation to address sort of movements and streams of thought in the American Catholic and World Catholic Church that are healthy and also those which are unhealthy. And I think obviously fundamentalism is an unhealthy stream of thought. In Catholic Christianity, my own field is the United States, American Catholicism in the 20th and 21st century. I wrote this book as a way of addressing what I thought a very unhealthy stream of thought emerges after World War II. We can date it, 1945. And it has grown, not grown immensely, but it's bigger, stronger, wealthier, more lodged in certain secure positions thanks to healthy donations from wealthy people. And I think there are now fundamentalist colleges, there are fundamentalist journals, there are Catholic fundamentalist speakers, there is Catholic fundamentalist theologians. And I think that stream has grown, as I say, not exponentially, but has grown stronger because it's been going on for 60 years now. And I think there's a way of speaking that once you're attuned to it, it's very funny. Once you're attuned to it and you sort of start listening to a blog, you think, oh my God, I've heard this before. It's the shock of recognition. This is something that's part of a larger stream. So what my book tries to do is to provide some evidence of that stream in the past 60 years. Talk about how they're the same, but also how they're different. Not all fundamentalists embody the same set of principles in the same order, which I've talked about. And they each have a different set of priorities for doing their belief systems. For Leonard Feeney, it was about extra ecclesiam nulla salus, about believing outside the church is no salvation. For Gomer de Paul, who founded the traditional Latin Mass Society in the 1960s, it was about the Latin Mass. And anybody who worshiped using anything other than the Latin Mass was in heresy. So it depends. There's different things for different people. Christendom College, which is one of the chapters in my book, and I would describe it as the fundamentalist college in Virginia, in the Blue Hills of Virginia. And the very name Christendom, I think, is very disturbing because Christendom is a belief that there should be one church and one state, and there should be no pluralism whatsoever. And the way those individuals and groups embody those principles looks somewhat different, but the commonalities are strong enough you would say, okay, this is part of the same family tree. There's a family line here that, they all look a little different, but they're all basically part of this same stream of thought.
Great. Thank you for that answer. I guess I'm wondering, you've basically taken on this big challenge. You said earlier about how in O'Neill 5, there's all this on Protestant fundamentalism, and this is kind of the first major work in Catholic fundamentalism. How do you see the field evolving And then I guess from the start, you have this first book. What do you want readers to take away? If there's the one thing you want them to leave with?
I want them to see that there is a healthy pluralism and an unhealthy pluralism in the American Catholic Church. I myself believe that pluralism is healthy, including theological pluralism. And I think there's a healthy pluralism. We are a much more pluralistic church today than we were 50 years ago or 100 years ago. There are very many more ethnic and national groups in the American Catholic Church who bring with them their own traditions of worship and faith and piety, and that's a healthy thing. And respect for that diversity is a good thing. And I think that actually, I would say the American Catholic Church has been very, very successful at incorporating diversity and pluralism into itself. So that, if you go to different kinds of parishes, if you go to a Vietnamese parish on Sunday morning, and Mass looks a little different than if you go to a Hispanic parish or if you go to a Haitian parish. And that's a good thing. So people are using their own traditions and backgrounds to worship God in a Catholic way, and they're all profoundly Catholic. But there's also an unhealthy pluralism that wants to stop the clock, go backwards, and force everybody to do what I do, to worship and think and pray as I do. And anyone else who does anything different isn't really Catholic anymore, or they're bad Catholics, or one of the favorite phrases that all these groups is, they're unfaithful Catholics. So who are they unfaithful to? Well, they would say to God, but I would say they're unfaithful to those fundamentalists' own understanding of what a Catholic should be. So they're trying to put everybody in the same mold and to use that one mold to judge everybody by. And I think that never works. That never works well. My experience is that genies, including Catholic genies, never go back into the bottle. I mean, that doesn't happen. History flows in one direction. So the idea we're going to put the genie back and pretend it's 1302 now, or say 1570 when the Roman Missal coming out of Trent was finally promulgated, that we can go back to 1570, just pretend we're all there in the 16th century. Well, we're not there. History moves on, What I want people to take away from the book is an understanding of the strength of Catholicism, which lies in its pluralism and its vast and very sophisticated theological and liturgical traditions, and also the dangers that those traditions have engendered among some people, a small but very vocal group of people, whom I call Catholic fundamentalists, who want everyone to go back to some one-size-fits-all model of the Catholic Church and of what Catholic believers believe. I think that's dangerous, and more than dangerous, I just think it's intellectually suspect. I mean, it's not possible to do that. And therefore, I want people to take away from the book an understanding of how this is a rejection of history. One of the reasons I love being a Catholic theologian is Catholicism takes history seriously. Catholicism wants to make sense of history and to preach the gospel to history, to a historical moment in a way that makes sense to that moment. The Catholic tradition has a long and quite valuable tradition of doing that. I want people to see that the church responds to these Catholic fundamentalists, I think, in largely pastoral ways. I mean, it's not been harsh exactly, but also in very strong ways, like, no, that is not what the Catholic tradition says, that's not what the tradition would move us toward. And I think that scares a lot of people because pluralism and novelty and thinking about things in different ways terrifies a lot of people. And they want black and white answers. If they want black and white answers to very complicated questions. Sometimes you can give people black and white answers, but sometimes you can't give them because historical situations are complicated and you have to be as complicated as the situation and trying to address what's going on there. I think fundamentalists don't like that complication. They don't like the messiness of dealing with that, sort of the intellectual duties of thinking through these things and coming up with an answer that's appropriate to people's lives. I think most people who watch this say, this doesn't sound right. This doesn't sound Catholic. I was talking to a couple students about this when I was researching the book. And I said, take a look at this video and see what you think. And they were very funny. They said, well, something about it just doesn't seem right. Like we have this sense that what's going on here is not really Catholicism, it's something else. Hopefully what the book will do is give people a language and a sort of a clothesline for hanging all this stuff on, so that they have a sense that what they're looking at represents a movement, a quite distinct movement, and helping people to make sense of what that movement is really about. Because, as I've always said, the old-time religion is not old and it's not religion. The old-time religion that these people think, it was invented in the 20th century. The old-time religion is very new. And these people who claim we're going to go back to the old-time religion, they're making this up. They don't have a good understanding of history, and they don't understand the historical sort of forces that compel us to embrace it at one time and then move on to a different understanding.
We have done a lot of events this year and last year on the rise of Christian nationalism at the Boisi Center and at Boston College. So I'm wondering, Professor Massa, if you could speak to the relationship between Catholic fundamentalism, its trajectory in the United States, and its relationship to Christian nationalism.
Yeah, good question. I think Christian nationalism, not in all of its forms, but Christian nationalism can be a form of fundamentalism. Christian nationalism represents a separate stream. It's an accompanying stream to fundamentalism. But my reading of Christian nationalism is not really about religion. Christian nationalism is not about religion. It's about the nation of the United States. And it's largely a form of white racism. That's my understanding. And therefore, they use religious language to talk about America's the Redeemer nation, the city on the hill, yada, yada, yada. But in fact, the majority of Christian nationalists themselves say they don't belong to a church. So it's not about church. It's not about religion in the denominational sense, in the Sunday morning or Saturday morning sense of church or synagogue. It's about church in the sense of representation of a culture when white men ruled. It was a safe culture because white men had control, and everybody was Christian, whether they wanted to be or not, or considered Christian, whether they wanted to be or not. And that Christians of color didn't have the same equality as white Christians did. So they want to go back to that moment they conceived. There never was such a moment as they conceived, but they want to go back to this moment they conceived as being when white Christian men ruled the world. They created the modern world. There's a lot of impulses there that are exactly analogous to fundamentalism. It's not exactly fundamentalism. You could say that their vision of America, say in 1950, was primitivist, but it's primitivist in a different way because its purpose is not primarily religious, but rather cultural and political. It's about who will have the power and who will not have the power. So there's overlap. And I presume that some of the Christian nationalists are fundamentalists, although I've not looked at that. That'd be an interesting project, to follow. That'd be an interesting senior thesis, by the way, in theology at Boston College. What percentage of Christian nationalists are Catholic fundamentalists? I don't know. But I think there probably is a slight overlap, not a big overlap. But I think there are two historical movements that are attempting to go back to a past that either didn't exist or didn't exist in the way they understood. And it's about who will have the power to declare who's inside and who's outside, Now, as you know, if you're a good sociologist, this is called deviance theory. Deviance theory is the theory about who gets to draw the line, who's inside the line and who's outside the line, who belongs to the tribe and who doesn't belong to the tribe. They're both about the line and who's inside and outside. But I think the way they draw the line is different, and how they would define the inside and outside is different. Christian nationalism the inside is about the culture of America, whereas I think for Catholic fundamentalists, the inside is the true church, which is the Catholic Church.
Well, thank you for being with us today, Father Massa. We really appreciate your time.
So thanks, guys. I appreciate this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Religion and American Life, a podcast by the Boisi Center for Religion and American Public Life at Boston College. For more information on the work of the Boisi Center, the Center's schedule of events, or to listen to other episodes of this podcast, please visit our website at bc.edu/boisi.